Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who can hurt you deepest. For Police Chief Catherine Blake, that painful truth was about to hit home in the most dangerous way possible. She'd spent 20 years building a department she could believe in, surrounded by officers she'd trust with her life. James Harper was just trying to make an honest living as a helicopter pilot, ferrying passengers around the city while raising his 8-year-old daughter alone. During a routine flight, his thermal scanner picked up something that shouldn't have been there. Someone in Catherine's trusted inner circle was meeting with people they had no business meeting with. Tonight, as Catherine sits in the Glasshouse restaurant reviewing security files, she has no idea that betrayal is watching her from across the street. James sees the threat first. Without warning, he moves behind her chair, covers her mouth, and whispers the words that will save her life. Don't talk. What deadly secret threatens to destroy everything Catherine has built? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Metro Police headquarters, casting long shadows across Chief Catherine Blake's corner office. At 52, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe, every commendation, every moment of respect through decades of dedicated service. The walls told her story, photographs with community leaders, certificates of merit, and a display case containing her father's badge from his 30-year career with the same department. Catherine had never imagined following in his footsteps until a pivotal moment during her sophomore year of college. A domestic violence call had gone tragically wrong in her neighborhood, and she watched helplessly as a young mother became another statistic. That night, she changed her major from business to criminal justice, driven by a simple belief that good people needed to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. 20 years later, she'd risen through the ranks, not through politics or connections, but through an unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. Her officers respected her because she never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. She knew their families, their struggles, their dreams. The department wasn't just her workplace, it was her extended family. Deputy Chief Roger Kendall knocked gently on her doorframe. A graying veteran with kind eyes and a gentle manner, he'd been her mentor since she was a rookie patrol officer. "Morning briefing in 10 minutes, Chief. We've got some interesting developments on the Riverside warehouse case." Catherine nodded, gathering the thick manila folders spread across her desk. The warehouse district had been plaguing her thoughts for weeks. What appeared to be routine drug investigations kept hitting dead ends, with evidence mysteriously disappearing and witnesses suddenly becoming uncooperative. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "Roger, have you noticed anything unusual about the evidence chain on these Riverside cases?" she asked, sliding one of the folders toward him. He paused, studying the documentation with the careful attention of someone who'd seen enough inconsistencies to recognize them. "Now that you mention it, there have been some irregularities. Nothing I could put my finger on, but the timing of certain transfers, the personnel assignments, it doesn't follow our usual protocols." Catherine made a mental note to dig deeper. In her experience, when things didn't feel right, there was usually a good reason. Across town, James Harper was performing his pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty overseas. At 38, the former Army aviator had traded military helicopters for civilian charter flights, but his attention to detail remained as sharp as ever. The transition to civilian life hadn't been easy, especially after becoming a single father when his wife died in a car accident 2 years ago. His daughter Lily was everything to him now. At 8 years old, she had her mother's bright smile and her father's curious nature. This morning, she sat in the hangar office doing homework while he completed his inspection, occasionally looking up to wave at him through the window. The sight never failed to remind him why he'd left the military. Some things were more important than serving his country, and protecting the little girl in that office was at the top of that list. "Daddy, Mrs. Henderson says I can stay at school for art club today if it's okay with you," Lily called out as James checked the helicopter's thermal imaging equipment. The device was standard for his charter work, primarily used for traffic monitoring and aerial photography contracts. "That sounds good, sweetheart. I should be back from my afternoon runs by 5, he replied, making a final adjustment to the thermal scanner's calibration. The equipment was military-grade, far more sophisticated than what most civilian operators used, but his government contracts occasionally required the enhanced capabilities. James had built his small charter business on reliability and discretion. His clients ranged from news stations needing aerial footage to real estate developers surveying properties. The work paid well enough to support Lily and himself, and it kept his flying skills sharp. Most importantly, it allowed him to be present for his daughter in ways his military service never had. The Glass House restaurant occupied the 32nd floor of the Meridian building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Catherine had chosen this location for her security briefings because the open environment made surveillance difficult, and the white noise of conversation provided natural cover for sensitive discussions. She arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, claiming a corner table that afforded her a clear view of both the elevator bank and the restaurant's main entrance. The afternoon sun created a warm ambiance, and the lunch crowd provided the perfect backdrop for what appeared to be a casual business meeting. Catherine spread her files methodically across the table, each document representing hours of investigation into what was becoming a troubling pattern. The Riverside cases were just the beginning. She'd identified similar irregularities in evidence handling, witness protection protocols, and interdepartmental communications. Someone with significant access was manipulating the system. But the scope suggested this wasn't the work of a single rogue officer. Deputy Chief Kendall arrived precisely on time, his expression grave as he slid into the seat across from her. "Catherine, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. I pulled some additional files, and what I found concerns me." He placed a slim folder on the table between them. "Personnel assignments for the Riverside investigations show a pattern. The same small group of officers keeps appearing on these cases, always in positions where they'd have access to evidence or witness information." Catherine opened the folder, scanning the assignment sheets with growing unease. Names she recognized, officers she'd worked with for years, appeared again and again. "This can't be coincidence." "That's what worries me," Kendall replied quietly. "These are good officers, Catherine. People we've trusted with our most sensitive operations." Neither of them noticed the figure across the street, partially concealed behind a newspaper stand, speaking quietly into a cell phone. The watcher had been there for 20 minutes. Positioned with a clear view of the restaurant's interior, 5,000 feet above the city, James Harper was completing a routine aerial survey contract when his thermal imaging display caught something unusual. The scanner showed heat signatures in an area that should have been abandoned, the old Riverside warehouse district. Multiple vehicles, several human figures, and what appeared to be a coordinated operation taking place in broad daylight. James adjusted the scanner's focus, his military training automatically cataloging what he observed. Police vehicles, but not in any official capacity he recognized. The heat signatures suggested at least 8 individuals moving with purpose through a structure that was supposed to be empty. Something cold settled in his stomach as he realized what he might be witnessing. The professional in him wanted to document everything, while the father in him wanted to fly away and pretend he'd seen nothing. But 20 years of military service had taught him that some things couldn't be unseen or ignored. He reached for his camera. The thermal scanner's display painted the warehouse in stark orange and red heat signatures that made James's blood run cold. What he was witnessing through his helicopter's advanced imaging system defied every protocol he understood about police operations. 7 figures moved through the abandoned structure with military precision, while 3 police cruisers sat positioned as perimeter security. but there was no official operation scheduled for this sector. James had spent enough time coordinating with law enforcement during his military service to recognize the difference between legitimate operations and something else entirely. This had all the hallmarks of the latter. He adjusted the scanner's resolution, capturing clear thermal images of the license plates below. Two of the vehicles belonged to the Metro Police Department, but their positioning suggested concealment rather than official presence. Through his headset, he could hear routine radio chatter from the police dispatcher. Nothing about any operation in the Riverside district. James felt the familiar knot in his stomach that had served him well during his tours overseas. The instinct that warned him when situations weren't what they appeared to be. He activated his flight recorder and began documenting everything. The figures inside the warehouse were exchanging what appeared to be large containers with individuals who definitely weren't law enforcement. The thermal signatures showed weapons on both sides, but this wasn't a raid or an arrest operation. This was a transaction. One of the police officers turned toward the vehicles, and James caught a clear thermal profile. Even from 5,000 feet, the body language and movement patterns were distinctive enough that he might be able to identify the individual later. He captured multiple images, his military photography training ensuring he documented angles, timestamps, and positional data. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. James watched as the non-police individuals departed in unmarked vehicles, while the officers secured whatever had been exchanged and prepared to leave themselves. But instead of heading toward headquarters or any official facility, the police vehicles split up and disappeared into different areas of the industrial district. James's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was racing. He'd just documented what appeared to be police involvement in illegal activity, and he had no idea who he could trust with the information. The thermal images were clear enough to be used as evidence, but approaching the wrong person could put both him and Lily in danger. As he guided his helicopter back toward the city center, James made a decision that would change everything. He needed to find someone in law enforcement he could trust, someone with the authority to investigate what he'd witnessed. Chief Catherine Blake had a reputation for integrity that even the cynics respected. If anyone could be trusted with this information, it would be her, but approaching her directly seemed dangerous. He needed to observe her first, to assess whether she might be involved in whatever conspiracy he'd stumbled upon. The Glass House restaurant was known to be one of her regular meeting places. If he could watch her interactions, he might be able to determine if she was part of the problem or the solution. That evening, James arranged for Lily to stay with her best friend's family, telling them he had an emergency charter flight. He positioned himself across from the Glass House with a clear view of the restaurant's interior, using a telephoto lens to observe Catherine's meeting with Deputy Chief Kendall. For 2 hours, he watched their body language, their interactions, the documents they shared. Everything about their conversation suggested genuine concern and legitimate investigation. When Catherine opened a folder and her expression shifted to one of obvious shock and dismay, James felt reasonably confident that she wasn't part of whatever he'd witnessed at the warehouse. But as he prepared to leave his observation post, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. 3 men in dark clothing had taken positions around the restaurant building. They moved with professional precision, coordinating their positions through subtle hand signals that James recognized from his military experience. These weren't police officers. They were operators, and they were positioning themselves for what looked like a coordinated assault on the restaurant. James felt time compress around him as he realized that Chief Blake was about to walk into a trap, and he was the only person in position to warn her. He grabbed his gear and ran toward the building, his mind automatically shifting into tactical mode. The entrance lobby would be monitored, but the service elevators might provide access to the restaurant level. He had perhaps 5 minutes before the operation commenced, based on the positioning patterns he'd observed. James reached the Meridian building just as the first operator entered the lobby. Using his military training, he slipped through a service entrance and made his way to the freight elevator. The 32nd floor seemed like an eternity away as the elevator climbed, each floor marker increasing his anxiety about what he might find when the doors opened. The service corridor was empty, but James could hear voices from the restaurant's main dining area. He peered around the corner and immediately spotted Catherine and Kendall at their corner table, completely unaware of the danger closing in around them. The operators had reached the restaurant level and were positioning themselves for what appeared to be an elimination rather than an arrest. James had no weapon, no backup, and no official authority to intervene. But he had 20 years of military experience and the absolute certainty that innocent people were about to be killed unless he acted immediately. Chief Blake represented not just a potential ally in investigating the warehouse conspiracy. She was a good person whose life was in immediate danger. He moved quickly through the restaurant's periphery, using the dinner crowd as cover while keeping Catherine's table in sight. The operators were closing in, their positions suggesting they intended to eliminate both Blake and Kendall before making their escape. James calculated angles, timing, and options as he approached Catherine's table from behind. The thermal scanner images were still fresh in his memory. Police officers involved in illegal activity, evidence of corruption at the highest levels, and now an assassination attempt against the one person who might be able to expose the truth. James realized that his routine charter flight had made him a witness to something much larger and more dangerous than he'd initially understood. As he reached Catherine's chair, James could see the first operator reaching into his jacket. There was no time for explanations, no opportunity for lengthy warnings. He had perhaps 3 seconds to prevent a double homicide and preserve the only evidence of the conspiracy he'd discovered. James placed his hand gently but firmly over Catherine's mouth and leaned close to her ear. In a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke the 2 words that would save her life and irrevocably change both of their futures. Don't talk. The roof access door burst open as Catherine and James emerged into the evening air, the city's lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness below. James's helicopter sat on the building's landing pad like a mechanical salvation, its rotors already beginning their slow rotation as the engine warmed up. Remote start, James explained, helping Catherine climb into the passenger compartment. Military modification allows for rapid departure in hostile situations. As Catherine strapped herself into the unfamiliar harness, she could hear commotion from the stairwell behind them. Heavy footsteps, multiple voices, and the unmistakable sound of tactical equipment suggested their pursuers had reached the roof level. James slipped into the pilot's seat with fluid efficiency, his hands moving across the controls with the precision of someone who'd performed this sequence hundreds of times under pressure. "Hang on," he said, pulling back on the collective. The helicopter lifted smoothly from the pad just as the roof access door exploded open and 3 figures in tactical gear burst onto the landing area. Catherine watched through the aircraft's windows as the operators below spoke urgently into their communications equipment. Within seconds, she could hear radio chatter on James's aviation frequency. Ground units were being mobilized to track their flight path, and air traffic control was being instructed to monitor all civilian aircraft departures. "They're coordinating a citywide search," James said, adjusting their heading toward the industrial district. "But they're assuming we'll try to flee the area. Instead, we're going to circle back and gather more intelligence about what we're dealing with." Catherine's police radio, though turned off, sat silent in her equipment belt, like a reminder of everything she'd lost in the span of 30 minutes. Her entire career, her department, her life, all of it now existed on the other side of an invisible line she'd crossed when she climbed into James's helicopter. "Chief Blake," James said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation, "I need you to understand something. The operation I witnessed at the warehouse wasn't small-time corruption. The coordination, the resources, the willingness to eliminate a police chief. This is organized crime with deep penetration into your department. Catherine studied the thermal imaging display in front of her, watching the heat signatures of the city pass below. How deep do you think the penetration goes? Deep enough that they knew about your investigation before tonight, James replied. Someone with access to your schedule, your meeting locations, your case files. This wasn't a reactive operation. They were planning your elimination. The helicopter banked toward the Riverside district, and Catherine could see the warehouse where James had witnessed the initial transaction. From the air, the building appeared abandoned, but the thermal scanner revealed recent activity. Vehicles had been there within the last few hours, and the ground showed heat retention patterns consistent with heavy equipment. There, James pointed to a cluster of thermal signatures near the warehouse's loading dock. 3 vehicles, approximately 8 individuals. They're still conducting operations. Catherine leaned forward to study the display more carefully. Can you get us close enough to identify the vehicles without being detected? Military-grade thermal imaging works both ways, James explained. We can see them, but they can also detect our heat signature if they have the right equipment. However, I can mask our approach using the industrial cooling towers for cover. As they descended toward the warehouse district, Catherine's mind catalogued everything she'd observed about the conspiracy. The pattern of evidence tampering, the specific officer assignments, the timing of their meeting interruption. Someone had been monitoring her investigation and planning countermeasures. James, the people trying to kill us, they're not just protecting a drug operation or money laundering scheme. They're protecting something big enough to justify murdering a police chief. Agreed, James said, maneuvering the helicopter behind a series of industrial structures that blocked their approach from ground observation. And they're confident enough in their protection to operate openly in broad daylight. Through the thermal scanner, they watched the figures below loading material into vehicles with methodical efficiency. Catherine recognized the tactical formation. This wasn't random criminal activity, but a coordinated operation with multiple security layers and escape routes. Can you record this? She asked. Already am, James confirmed. Time-stamped, GPS coordinated, multiple angles. If we survive this, you'll have everything needed for a federal investigation. The word "if" hung in the air between them like a sobering reminder of their precarious situation. Catherine had gone from investigating corruption to becoming a fugitive in less than an hour, and the people hunting them had resources that extended throughout her department. My daughter, James said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that Catherine recognized. She's staying with friends tonight. But if they identify me, they won't hurt a child, Catherine interrupted, though even as she said it, she realized how naive that sounded given what they'd already witnessed. Chief Blake, these people just tried to assassinate a police chief in a public restaurant. I don't think they have many ethical boundaries. Catherine felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Not only had her investigation put her own life in danger, but it had also endangered an innocent pilot and his daughter. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than anything she'd imagined, and the resources available to their enemies seemed limitless. We need allies, she said finally. People outside the department who can be trusted with this evidence. Federal agents? James suggested maybe, but first we need to understand how deep this goes. If there's corruption in my department, there might be corruption anywhere. Below them, the warehouse operation concluded as quickly as it had begun. Vehicles dispersed in different directions, their thermal signatures fading as they moved beyond the scanner's range. Catherine and James were left hovering above an empty building with evidence of criminal activity, but no immediate targets for investigation. Where do we go now? Catherine asked. James checked his fuel gauge and flight computer. I have a private hangar outside the city limits. It's not registered under my current business name, so it should be safe for a few hours while we plan our next move. As they flew toward temporary sanctuary, Catherine realized that her old life was over. Whatever emerged from this conspiracy, she would never again be the respected police chief who'd started this day reviewing routine case files. The question now was whether she'd live long enough to expose the truth or become another casualty of whatever corruption had infected her department. The private hangar sat 40 miles outside the city limits, tucked away in a rural airfield that served primarily crop dusters and weekend flight enthusiasts. James guided his helicopter through the growing darkness, using terrain features to mask their approach from any potential surveillance aircraft. Catherine watched the flight navigation computer display their route, noting how James avoided all major flight corridors and maintained radio silence throughout their journey. "This hangar was my father's," James explained, as they touched down inside the weathered metal building. He ran aerial photography services for agricultural clients before he retired. The registration is still under his business name, which hasn't been active for 5 years. Catherine climbed out of the helicopter on unsteady legs, the adrenaline of their escape finally beginning to wear off. The hangar smelled of motor oil and decades of aviation fuel, with tools and equipment arranged along the walls in the methodical order of someone who understood that proper maintenance meant the difference between life and death. "We should have a few hours before anyone thinks to check rural airfields," James continued, activating overhead lights that illuminated the space in harsh fluorescent clarity. "But we need to use that time wisely." Catherine pulled out her secure laptop, one of the few pieces of equipment she'd managed to grab during their hasty escape. "I've been investigating irregularities in evidence handling for weeks. What I thought was isolated corruption might be part of something much larger." As her computer booted up, James retrieved a military-grade tablet from his flight bag. The device contained encrypted copies of all the thermal imaging data he'd collected, along with flight records and timestamps that would establish the credibility of his evidence. "Show me what you witnessed at the warehouse," Catherine said, settling into a metal folding chair beside a workbench that James had cleared for their use. James activated the thermal imaging playback, and Catherine watched the recorded footage with growing alarm. The operation she saw wasn't the random drug deal or money laundering scheme she'd initially suspected. The level of coordination, the military-style precision, and the involvement of multiple police vehicles suggested something far more organized and dangerous. "These heat signatures," she said, pointing to the display. "How many individuals can you definitively identify as police officers?" "At least 4, James replied, adjusting the image resolution, "based on equipment profiles and movement patterns consistent with law enforcement training. But the concerning part is how they interact with the non-police participants. This isn't an undercover operation, it's a partnership." Catherine cross-referenced the timestamp with her department's duty rosters, her expression growing darker as she identified which officers would have been off-duty during the warehouse meeting. 3 names stood out, all of them assigned to cases involving the Riverside district within the past 6 months. "Officers Peterson, Kowalski, and Rivera," she said quietly. "All of them have exemplary records, commendations for bravery, families in the community. If they're involved in this conspiracy, it means the corruption has infected officers I trusted completely." James studied her face, recognizing the particular pain of professional betrayal. "In my military experience, the most dangerous conspiracies are built around people who appear beyond suspicion. Clean records, respected reputations, access to sensitive information." Catherine's laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Deputy Chief Kendall. She opened the communication, her heart sinking as she read his brief report. "Your office searched by unknown personnel claiming federal authority. All files related to Riverside investigation confiscated. Suggest you maintain low profile until situation clarifies." "They moved fast," James observed, reading over her shoulder. "Professional teams, federal cover credentials, immediate evidence seizure. This isn't local corruption. It's organized crime with government-level resources." Catherine felt the walls closing in around her investigation. Not only had her suspects been warned about her surveillance, but they'd also managed to confiscate all her physical evidence within hours of the restaurant incident. The scope of their resources suggested connections that extended far beyond her local department. "James, your thermal imaging data might be the only evidence that still exists," she said. "Everything else has been compromised or confiscated, which makes us extremely valuable witnesses," James replied grimly, "and extremely dangerous targets." Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Chief Blake, we have your pilot's daughter. Cease all investigation activities and surrender yourself at the Riverside warehouse within 2 hours, or the child will be harmed. Come alone." James read the message over her shoulder, his face going white with terror and rage. "Lily," he whispered, his hands trembling as he reached for his own phone to call his daughter's temporary guardians. The call went straight to voicemail. James tried the school, the aftercare program, even the parents of Lily's friends. Every number he called either didn't answer or claimed they hadn't seen her since school ended. Catherine watched the color drain from his face as the reality of the situation settled in. "They have her," he said, his voice hollow with despair. "My 8-year-old daughter is being held hostage because I witnessed their warehouse operation." Catherine felt her professional instincts warring with her human compassion. The tactical part of her mind recognized this as a classic intimidation technique designed to force their surrender. But the mother in her, she'd lost her own child years ago to cancer, understood James's panic on a visceral level. "We can't just surrender," she said carefully. "If they're willing to kidnap a child, they won't hesitate to kill all 3 of us once they have what they want. And if we don't surrender, they'll hurt her," James replied, his military training fighting against paternal desperation. "She's 8 years old, Catherine. She's everything I have left." Catherine studied the warehouse thermal imaging again, this time looking for tactical advantages rather than evidence of corruption. "What if we don't play by their rules? What if instead of surrendering, we extract your daughter and gather more evidence at the same time?" James looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "That's a military-style rescue operation. We don't have backup weapons or intelligence about the facility's security, but we have your thermal imaging equipment. My knowledge of police tactics and the element of surprise," Catherine countered. "They're expecting us to either run or surrender. They won't be prepared for an assault." James was quiet for several minutes, weighing impossible choices between his daughter's immediate safety and their long-term survival. Finally, he activated his helicopter's weapons systems, modifications that weren't standard on civilian aircraft, but had been authorized for his government contract work. "If we're going to do this," he said quietly, "we need to do it right. One chance, maximum impact, no room for error." James opened a military-style equipment locker that Catherine hadn't noticed during their initial arrival at the hangar. Inside, arranged with the precision of someone who understood that proper preparation saved lives, was an array of tactical gear that spoke to his specialized background. Night vision equipment, communication devices, protective armor, and weapons that were definitely not standard civilian issue. Delta Force. "3 tours," James said quietly, noting Catherine's surprised expression. "I wasn't just a transport pilot. I was part of special operations units that required, let's say, enhanced skill sets." Catherine felt a surge of hope as she realized their situation might not be as hopeless as she'd initially thought. "What kind of enhanced skill sets?" "Close quarters combat, tactical assault, hostage rescue," James replied, his demeanor shifting from desperate father to trained operator. "The kind of missions that officially never happened, in places that aren't supposed to exist." He pulled out a tablet containing detailed satellite imagery of the Riverside warehouse district, apparently updated within the last few hours. Catherine recognized the thoroughness of military intelligence. Gathering, James had been planning for this. Possibility, since they'd first observed the warehouse. Operation, I've been conducting surveillance on this facility for the past week, James explained, spreading the satellite images across the workbench. Multiple entry points, security camera locations, guard rotation patterns, and vehicle access routes. What started as curiosity about police involvement became operational planning when I realized the scope of what we were dealing with. Catherine studied the imagery with growing respect for James's tactical acumen. You've been planning a one-man assault on a fortified criminal operation? I've been planning for the possibility that my daughter might become a target, James corrected. In my experience, the best way to protect someone is to eliminate the threat rather than hide from it. The warehouse complex was larger than Catherine had realized from their aerial observations. Multiple buildings, extensive underground facilities indicated by ventilation systems, and defensive positions that suggested the occupants expected potential assault. But James had identified weaknesses, blind spots in the security coverage, structural vulnerabilities, and approach routes that would minimize their exposure. The thermal imaging from my helicopter shows they're holding someone in the northeast building, James said, pointing to heat signatures that appeared separate from the main operational areas. Based on the isolation and the guard pattern, that's likely where they're keeping Lily. Catherine felt her police instincts engaging as she studied the tactical situation. How many hostiles are we looking at? 12 to 15 based on vehicle capacity and thermal signatures, James replied. Mix of criminals and corrupt officers, all armed, some with military-grade equipment. But they're not expecting an assault. They think they have us cornered. Catherine reached into her equipment bag and retrieved her service weapon, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. What's our insertion plan? James looked at her with surprise and concern. Catherine, this isn't a police operation. This is military-style hostage rescue with significant probability of casualties. You don't have the training for this kind of engagement. I have 20 years of police experience, weapons training and tactical knowledge, Catherine replied firmly. More importantly, I have a stake in stopping these people that goes beyond rescuing your daughter. They've destroyed my career, corrupted my department, and tried to kill me. I'm not sitting this out. James recognized the determination. In her voice, the same resolve he'd seen in special operations partners who understood that some missions required personal investment beyond professional duty. He nodded slowly and began outlining their assault plan. Helicopter insertion under cover of darkness, using the industrial cooling towers to mask our approach. I'll handle the security neutralization while you provide overwatch and communication support. Once we've secured Lily, we extract with additional evidence of the operation. Catherine studied the warehouse layout, noting the positioning of critical infrastructure and potential escape routes. What about backup? If this goes wrong, we'll be completely isolated. I've reached out to some former military contacts, James said, pulling out an encrypted communication device. People who understand the difference between official channels and getting things done. They can't provide direct support, but they can ensure our evidence reaches the right federal authorities if we don't survive. The weight of their situation settled between them like a heavy presence. They were planning to assault a fortified criminal operation with minimal resources, no backup, and the life of an innocent child hanging in the balance. But the alternative, surrendering to people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill, offered no better odds for survival. James, Catherine said quietly, I need you to understand something. If we don't come back from this, my department will be taken over by the same corruption we're fighting. Hundreds of officers, thousands of citizens, they'll all be affected by what these people have built. And if I don't get my daughter back safely, none of the rest of it matters, James replied. She's the only family I have left, Catherine nodded, understanding the impossible balance between personal stakes and professional duty. Then we make sure we succeed at both. James activated his encrypted communications and sent a brief message to his military contacts. Operation Nightfall commencing. Evidence package transmitted. If no contact within 6 hours, assume worst-case scenario. As they prepared their equipment and reviewed the assault plan one final time, Catherine found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, she'd been a respected police chief investigating routine corruption. Tonight, she was planning a military-style assault to rescue a kidnapped child and expose a conspiracy that threatened everything she'd worked to build. "Ready?" James asked, his voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who'd faced similar situations before. Catherine checked her weapon one last time and nodded. "Let's bring your daughter home and end this nightmare." As Catherine uploaded the warehouse surveillance data to her secure laptop for analysis, her facial recognition software began processing the thermal images with enhanced clarity algorithms. What appeared as anonymous heat signatures to the naked eye resolved into identifiable profiles when cross-referenced with her department's personnel database. The results that populated her screen made her blood run cold. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come look at this." The enhanced thermal imaging revealed facial profiles that were unmistakably familiar. But it wasn't just the corrupt officers she'd suspected. The central figure coordinating the entire warehouse operation was Deputy Chief Roger Kendall, the man she'd trusted with her life for 20 years. "That's impossible," Catherine breathed, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Roger is the one who warned me about the evidence irregularities. He's been helping with the investigation." James studied the enhanced images with the analytical detachment of someone trained to accept unpleasant truths. "Look at the body language, the positioning. He's not participating reluctantly. He's commanding the operation." Catherine scrolled through additional frames, each one confirming what her mind refused to accept. Roger Kendall, her mentor and trusted second-in-command, was at the center of every criminal transaction. The man who'd guided her career, who'd eaten dinner with her family, who'd been like a father to her. He was the architect of the conspiracy she'd been investigating. He knew about our meeting tonight, Catherine realized. The full scope of the betrayal beginning to crystallize. He suggested the Glasshouse restaurant. He recommended the time, the location, even the seating arrangement. James pulled up the encrypted files Catherine had shared with Kendall over the past weeks, cross-referencing them with the timeline of criminal operations. Every piece of evidence you discovered, every pattern you identified, he knew about it immediately. He's been using your investigation to identify and eliminate threats to his operation. Catherine felt nauseated as the implications became clear. The officers I suspected of corruption, Peterson, Kowalski, Rivera, they might have been investigating the same conspiracy from different angles. If Roger identified them as threats, they're probably dead, James finished quietly. Made to look like accidents, transfers, early retirements. Anyone who got close to exposing the truth would have been eliminated. The thermal imaging showed Roger coordinating with individuals who were clearly not law enforcement. Based on their equipment and tactical positioning, they appeared to be international criminals with significant resources and military training. This wasn't local police corruption. It was a sophisticated criminal organization that had infiltrated law enforcement at the highest levels. "How long has this been going on?" Catherine asked. Though she dreaded the answer, James enhanced the financial metadata embedded in his surveillance files, revealing bank account numbers and transaction records that his military-grade equipment had intercepted. Based on the communication patterns and operational sophistication, at least 5 years. Probably longer. Catherine opened her department's personnel files, searching for patterns she'd missed during her initial investigation. Roger Kendall had been instrumental in hiring decisions, promotion recommendations, and case assignments throughout his tenure as deputy chief. Looking at the data with fresh eyes, she could see how he'd systematically placed allies in key positions while marginalizing potential threats. "He built this from the inside," she said. The professional admiration mixing with personal devastation. "Every reform I tried to implement, every improvement in procedures and oversight, he was there to guide the changes in directions that served his purposes." James activated his encrypted communication device and showed Catherine a message he'd intercepted during their flight to the hangar. Blake neutralized. Pilot identified as Harper James, former Delta Force. Daughter in custody. "Proceed with federal evidence destruction. The message is from Roger," James said grimly. He's coordinating the entire response to our escape. The federal agents who confiscated your files, the assassination attempt at the restaurant, the kidnapping of my daughter. He's orchestrating all of it. Catherine felt 20 years of professional relationships and personal trust crumbling around her. Every major case, every important decision, every moment of career advancement, Roger had been there, guiding and supporting her while secretly undermining everything she believed in. The Riverside warehouse isn't just a meeting location, Catherine realized, studying the building's layout with new understanding. It's the operational headquarters for a criminal organization that's been using police resources to facilitate international crime. James pulled up additional surveillance data showing the warehouse's true purpose: money laundering, weapons trafficking, human trafficking. The thermal signatures indicate industrial-scale criminal operations. Your police department has been providing security, intelligence, and operational support for one of the largest criminal enterprises on the East Coast. Catherine's secure laptop chimed with an incoming message from Roger. Catherine, I've been trying to reach you since the restaurant incident. We have federal agents asking questions about your investigation. I'm concerned about your safety. Please contact me immediately so we can coordinate a response. The message was perfectly crafted, concerned, supportive, offering exactly the kind of help that Catherine would normally have accepted without question. But now she could see the manipulation, the careful phrasing designed to determine her location and status. He doesn't know we've identified him, Catherine said. He's still playing the role of concerned mentor, trying to locate us for elimination. James began plotting assault routes on the warehouse complex with renewed urgency. If Roger is coordinating the operation, he'll have access to all our communications, our personnel files, our tactical capabilities. He knows everything about how we think and operate. Catherine stared at the thermal images of her mentor, commanding criminal operations, feeling the weight of personal betrayal crushing down on her. James, my entire career has been built on lies. Every case I solved, every promotion I earned, every moment of professional pride, he was controlling all of it. The question now, James said quietly, is whether we can use his overconfidence against him. He thinks he knows us, but he's never seen us working together. He's never faced the combination of your police expertise and my military training. Catherine closed the laptop and reached for her tactical gear with new determination. Then let's show him what he doesn't know about us. Let's rescue your daughter and destroy everything he's built. As they prepared for their assault on the warehouse complex, Catherine realized that this was no longer just about exposing corruption or rescuing a kidnapped child. This was about confronting 20 years of manipulation and betrayal and ensuring that Roger Kendall's criminal empire died with him. The pre-dawn darkness provided perfect cover as James and Catherine conducted their final reconnaissance of the warehouse complex. Using military-grade night vision equipment, they observed guard rotations, vehicle movements, and communication patterns from a concealed position half a mile from the target facility. Roger Kendall's operation was more extensive than either of them had initially realized. 12 external guards rotating every 2 hours, James whispered, updating their tactical assessment. Heavy weapons positioned at 3 choke points, and what appears to be a command center in the main building's upper level. Catherine studied the complex through her night vision scope, noting the professional positioning and equipment that spoke to military-level training. These aren't typical criminals. The coordination, the weapons, the tactical awareness. This is an organized military-style operation. Through their thermal imaging equipment, they could see Lily's heat signature in the northeast building, separated from the main operational areas but under constant guard. The 8-year-old appeared to be unharmed, but was clearly being held under heavy security that would make extraction extremely dangerous. 2 guards inside her building, on roving patrol outside, James observed, his voice tight with controlled emotion. They're keeping her isolated but accessible. Insurance against our cooperation. Catherine activated her encrypted communication device and composed a message designed to manipulate Roger's expectations. Roger, James, and I are prepared to surrender in exchange for the child's safety. We'll arrive at the warehouse in 1 hour. Please ensure no harm comes to the girl." The response came within minutes. "Catherine, I'm relieved you're safe. Bring the thermal imaging evidence and surrender peacefully. The child will be released unharmed once we have confirmation that no additional copies of the surveillance data exist." James read the message with grim satisfaction. He's positioning himself as our savior while coordinating our elimination. Classic manipulation. He probably believes his own performance. They had spent the previous 4 hours preparing for an assault that would require precision timing, overwhelming force, and flawless execution. James's military experience provided the tactical framework, while Catherine's knowledge of police procedures helped them anticipate Roger's countermeasures. "Insertion Plan Alpha," James said, reviewing their approach route one final time. "Helicopter fast rope insertion onto the northeast building, neutralize guards securing Lily. Establish defensive position while you coordinate evidence transmission to federal authorities." Catherine checked her tactical communication equipment, ensuring their encrypted channels remained secure from Roger's interception capabilities. Evidence package is uploaded to 3 separate federal databases with automatic transmission triggers. If we don't check in every 30 minutes, everything we've discovered gets released simultaneously. The weight of their situation pressed down on both of them as they prepared for what might be their final mission. Catherine was about to assault a facility commanded by the man who'd shaped her entire career, while James was risking everything to rescue the daughter who represented his only remaining family. "Catherine," James said quietly as they conducted final equipment checks, "if something happens to me during the assault, get Lily out and make sure the evidence reaches the right people. She's more important than revenge against Roger." "Nothing's going to happen to either of you," Catherine replied firmly. "We've planned this operation with military precision, and Roger doesn't know we're coming. We have every tactical advantage." James activated his helicopter's stealth modifications, engine dampeners, rotor noise reduction, and heat signature masking that would make their approach nearly undetectable until they were directly over the target. The aircraft had been modified for special operations missions that officially didn't exist. And tonight, it would serve one final clandestine purpose. Roger expects us to arrive by ground vehicle. "Probably along the main access road," Catherine said, studying satellite imagery of the warehouse district. "A vertical insertion from an unexpected vector should give us several minutes of operational surprise." Through their surveillance equipment, they watched the warehouse guards maintaining routine patrol patterns that suggested confidence in their defensive positions. Roger's operation had clearly been successful for so long that they'd become complacent about external threats. "Thermal shows 23 individuals in the main complex," James reported, scanning the buildings with enhanced imaging, "but only 2 guarding Lily's location. Once we neutralize them, we can establish a defensive position and coordinate extraction." Catherine felt the familiar pre-operation tension that she remembered from her most dangerous police missions. But this was different. Tonight she wasn't operating under the authority of her badge or the protection of departmental backup. Tonight she was a rogue operator fighting to expose the corruption that had destroyed everything she'd worked to build. "James, when we get in there, Roger is going to try to manipulate me. He's going to claim he was working undercover, or that he was forced into cooperation, or that everything was justified by some larger purpose." "And?" James asked, recognizing the conflict in her voice. "And I need you to remember that he kidnapped your daughter and tried to have us both killed. Whatever he says, whatever justifications he offers, he's a criminal who's been destroying lives for years." James nodded grimly. "I won't forget." They climbed into the helicopter as the first hints of dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The assault needed to be completed before full daylight exposed their position and eliminated their tactical advantages. Roger's operation would be expecting them within the hour, but they'd be arriving 12 minutes early from an impossible direction. "Final communication check," Catherine said, activating her encrypted radio. Federal evidence package confirmed, uploaded, and ready for automatic transmission. Local law enforcement contacts have been briefed on our situation. If we don't survive this, Roger's entire network will be exposed within hours. James started the helicopter's engines, the modified rotors producing barely a whisper of sound as they lifted off from their concealed position. "Lily, Daddy's coming," he said quietly, his voice carrying 20 years of military determination and a father's desperate love. As they flew toward the warehouse complex through the pre-dawn darkness, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. This morning she'd been a respected police chief investigating routine corruption. Tonight she was conducting a military-style assault to rescue a kidnapped child and expose the man who'd betrayed everything she believed in. 2 minutes to target, James announced, his voice shifting into the calm professionalism of a special operations pilot. Catherine checked her weapon one final time and prepared for the confrontation that would either vindicate 20 years of police service or destroy everything she'd worked to build. Either way, Roger Kendall's criminal empire was about to end. The helicopter descended through the pre-dawn darkness like a mechanical ghost, its modified rotors producing barely a whisper as James guided it toward the northeast building where Lily was being held. Catherine felt her heart hammering against her tactical vest as they approached the moment that would determine whether they saved an innocent child or became casualties of Roger's criminal empire. 30 seconds to insertion, James announced through their tactical headsets, his voice carrying the calm precision of someone who'd performed similar missions in hostile territory overseas. Catherine could see the warehouse complex spread out below them through her night vision equipment, a maze of buildings, guard positions, and criminal operations that had been masquerading as abandoned industrial facilities. Thermal imaging showed the 2 guards inside Lily's building, unaware that death was descending from above. James positioned the helicopter directly over the building's flat roof, the aircraft's stealth modifications keeping their approach undetected by the security teams below. "Fast rope deployment in 5 seconds, he said, his hands steady on the controls, despite the knowledge that his daughter's life hung in the balance. Catherine hooked her rappelling gear to the helicopter's deployment line, checking her weapon and communication equipment one final time. Below them, she could see heat signatures moving through the building, one guard near what appeared to be Lily's location, another positioned at the main entrance. "Go, go, go," James commanded. Catherine dropped through the helicopter's open door, rappelling down the deployment line with military precision. Her boots hit the roof with barely a sound, and she immediately moved to the building's rooftop access while James maneuvered the aircraft to a defensive position. Overhead, the door was unlocked, overconfidence on the part of guards who didn't expect aerial insertion. Catherine moved through the building's upper level with practiced stealth, her police training and tactical experience guiding her toward the heat signatures she'd observed from above. Through the building's thin walls, she could hear muffled conversation from the room where Lily was being held. One guard was speaking into a radio, reporting routine status to what was presumably the main command center. The other was positioned near a window, watching for ground-based approaches that would never come. Catherine reached the door to Lily's holding room and listened carefully to the conversation inside. "Boss wants us to move the package to the main building in 10 minutes, one guard was saying. "Something about using her for the final negotiation with Blake." "Copy that," the second guard replied. "Let me check the perimeter one more time before we move her." Catherine heard footsteps approaching the door and positioned herself for close-quarters combat. When the guard emerged from the room, she struck with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with dangerous criminals. The guard dropped unconscious before he could raise an alarm, his weapon secured and his radio disabled within seconds. The second guard, hearing the brief scuffle, called out from inside the room. "Johnson, everything okay out there?" Catherine modulated her voice to sound like the unconscious guard. "All clear. Thought I heard something, but it's nothing." She moved to the window where the second guard was positioned, approaching from his blind spot with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through 2 decades of police work. When she struck, it was with overwhelming force that neutralized the threat before he could endanger Lily. Inside the holding room, Catherine found 8-year-old Lily Harper sitting on a makeshift cot, her eyes wide with fear, but her spirit clearly unbroken. The little girl looked exactly like the photographs James carried in his helicopter. Bright, curious, and undeniably his daughter. "Lily," Catherine said softly, kneeling beside the cot while keeping her weapon ready for additional threats. "I'm Catherine, and your daddy sent me to take you home." Lily's face lit up with hope and relief. "Daddy's here. Is he okay?" "He's flying the helicopter outside, and he's very worried about you," Catherine replied, helping Lily to her feet while scanning the room for additional security measures. "We need to move quickly and quietly. Can you do that for me?" Lily nodded with the seriousness of a child who understood that grown-ups sometimes faced dangerous situations. "Are the bad men going to hurt us?" "Not if I can help it," Catherine said, leading Lily toward the building's exit while maintaining radio contact with James. "Package secured." Moving to extraction point, James's voice crackled through her headset. "Copy that. Be advised, thermal shows movement in the main building. They've noticed the communication gap from your guards." Catherine and Lily moved through the building's corridors toward the rooftop access. But before they could reach the stairs, Catherine heard vehicles approaching the building's perimeter. Through the windows, she could see tactical lights and the organized movement of armed personnel surrounding their position. "James, we've got company," Catherine reported. "Multiple hostiles, professional formation, heavy weapons. They've figured out what happened." Roger's voice came over external speakers positioned around the building. "Catherine, I know you're in there with the child. You've placed her in extreme danger by attempting this rescue. Surrender now, and I'll ensure both of your safety." Catherine felt rage building in her chest as she heard her mentor's voice, the same calm, authoritative tone he'd used to guide her career for 20 years, now being used to manipulate her into surrendering to the criminal operation he commanded. "Catherine," Roger continued over the speakers, "I've spent years preparing for this moment. Every tactical decision you might make, every police procedure you might follow, I taught them to you. You cannot outmaneuver someone who knows exactly how you think." Through the building's windows, Catherine could see the full scope of Roger's operation. Military-grade vehicles, professional operators, weapons and equipment that spoke to international criminal resources. But she could also see something Roger hadn't counted on: James's helicopter positioning itself for an aerial assault that would provide covering fire for their extraction. "Lily," Catherine said quietly, "we're going to play a game. When I say run, you're going to run as fast as you can toward the roof. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you keep running until you reach your daddy. Can you do that?" Lily nodded with the brave determination of a child who trusted the adult protecting her. Catherine activated her radio. "James, initiate suppression fire on my mark." "We're coming up hot." The helicopter's suppression fire erupted across the warehouse complex as James provided covering fire for Catherine and Lily's escape. The building shook with the impact of precision strikes against Roger's tactical positions, buying them precious seconds to reach the rooftop extraction point. "Run, Lily," Catherine shouted, pushing the 8-year-old toward the stairwell while returning fire against the operatives breaching the building's lower level. Lily sprinted up the stairs with the desperate speed of a child whose life depended on reaching safety, while Catherine provided rear-guard action against Roger's forces. The sound of combat echoed through the building, tactical radio chatter, weapons fire, and the approaching footsteps of professional operators who were determined to prevent their escape. Catherine reached the rooftop, just as James brought the helicopter into position for immediate extraction. But before they could reach the aircraft, Roger Kendall emerged from the stairwell behind them, his service weapon drawn and his face showing the cold determination of someone who'd spent years planning for this confrontation. "Catherine, stop!" Roger commanded, his voice carrying 20 years of authority and mentorship. "You're making a mistake that will destroy everything we've worked to build." Catherine positioned herself between Roger and Lily, her own weapon trained on the man who'd shaped her entire career, while secretly corrupting everything she believed in. "The only thing you built was a criminal empire that used my department as a cover for international crime. You don't understand the complexity of what we're dealing with," Roger replied, his tone shifting to the patient explanation he'd used during her training years. "The operations you witnessed were part of a federal task force investigating organized crime. Everything was authorized, everything was necessary." James maneuvered the helicopter closer to the rooftop, but Catherine could see additional aircraft approaching in the distance, Roger's backup arriving just as their extraction window was closing. Lily stood frozen between the two adults, her young mind struggling to process the life-and-death confrontation unfolding around her. "Federal task force." Catherine laughed bitterly. "Roger, I've seen the evidence. The money laundering, the weapons trafficking, the systematic corruption of police resources. You've been running a criminal organization for years." Roger's expression shifted from paternal concern to cold calculation. "Catherine, you were always too idealistic to understand the necessities of real police work. Sometimes justice requires methods that don't fit neatly into your moral framework. And sometimes," Catherine replied, "evil people convince themselves they're serving a greater good while they destroy innocent lives." The helicopter touched down on the rooftop, its rotors creating a whirlwind of debris and noise that forced everyone to shout over the mechanical thunder. James kept the aircraft steady while maintaining overwatch with the helicopter's defensive systems, ready to provide covering fire if the confrontation escalated. "Lily, get to the helicopter," Catherine commanded, but before the child could move, Roger stepped forward with his weapon raised. "The child stays here," Roger said firmly. "Catherine, you have 10 seconds to surrender your weapon and submit to arrest, or I'll be forced to use lethal force to protect this operation." Catherine saw the truth in Roger's eyes, the cold willingness to kill an 8-year-old child to preserve his criminal empire. This wasn't the mentor who'd guided her career or the father figure who'd supported her advancement. This was a criminal who'd spent years manipulating her while building an organization that destroyed everything police work was supposed to represent. "You're going to shoot a child?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying the moral outrage of someone confronting absolute corruption. "I'm going to do whatever is necessary to protect an operation that's taken years to build," Roger replied. "Catherine, you have no idea how much money, how many resources, how many lives have been invested in what you're trying to destroy." James's voice crackled through Catherine's headset. "Multiple aircraft approaching from the south. We have maybe 60 seconds before this rooftop becomes untenable." Catherine made her decision. Instead of engaging Roger in further conversation, she dove toward Lily while simultaneously drawing fire away from the child. Her movement forced Roger to choose between shooting an unarmed 8-year-old or engaging a trained police officer who was protecting her. Roger's hesitation, perhaps the last vestige of the mentor Catherine had once respected, gave her the opening she needed. She tackled Lily to the rooftop surface while returning fire with precision that forced Roger to seek cover behind the building's mechanical equipment. "Go, go, go," Catherine shouted, pushing Lily toward the helicopter while maintaining suppressive fire against Roger's position. James lifted off as soon as Lily was aboard, but Catherine found herself pinned down by Roger's return fire. The helicopter hovered just out of reach, its pilot torn between extracting Catherine and protecting his daughter from the additional aircraft that were rapidly approaching their position. "Catherine," Roger called out over the weapons fire, "this is your last chance. Surrender now, and I'll ensure you receive a fair trial. Continue this resistance, and you'll be killed as a terrorist threat to federal operations." Catherine looked at the helicopter where Lily was safely secured, then at Roger's position, where her former mentor was preparing for a final assault. She realized that her 20-year career in law enforcement had led to this moment, choosing between personal survival, and protecting innocent people from corruption that threatened everything she'd sworn to defend. "Roger," Catherine called back, "you taught me that good police officers never abandon their duty, no matter what the cost." She activated her tactical radio and transmitted the final evidence package to federal authorities, then prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether justice or corruption would control her department's future. "James, get Lily out of here," Catherine commanded through her headset. "And make sure she knows her daddy loves her. And make sure the evidence reaches the right people." As the helicopter began its extraction with Lily aboard, Catherine prepared for her final confrontation with the man who'd betrayed everything she'd spent her career trying to build. 6 months later, Catherine Blake stood before the newly constructed memorial wall in the Metro Police headquarters, reading the names of officers who had died in the line of duty. Among them was Deputy Chief Roger Kendall, whose final moments on that warehouse rooftop had been captured by news helicopters and federal surveillance aircraft. The official record showed that he died during a federal operation to expose the criminal organization he'd been leading, a fitting end to a career built on deception. The afternoon sun streamed through the building's renovated windows, casting warm light across the lobby where photographs of honest officers now hung beside commendations for integrity and community service. Catherine had spent the past 6 months rebuilding her department from the ground up, implementing transparency measures and accountability protocols that would prevent another Roger Kendall from corrupting the badge she'd devoted her life to serving. "Chief Blake?" Officer Patricia Santos approached with a respectful smile. At 25, she represented the new generation of police officers that Catherine was recruiting, young, idealistic, and committed to the community policing philosophy that had driven Catherine's own career. "The federal investigators are here for their final debriefing." Catherine nodded, straightening her uniform and checking her reflection in the memorial wall's polished surface. The woman looking back at her had aged considerably in the past 6 months, but her eyes held a clarity and determination that hadn't been there before her confrontation with Roger's criminal empire. The investigation that followed, the warehouse assault, had exposed corruption reaching far beyond Catherine's department. Roger's organization had infiltrated law enforcement agencies across 3 states, facilitating everything from money laundering to human trafficking. The evidence James had gathered, combined with the financial records recovered from the warehouse complex, had led to over 60 arrests and the dismantling of a criminal network that had operated for nearly a decade. Catherine walked through the headquarters building, noting the changes that had been implemented during the reconstruction period. Open floor plans replaced isolated offices, transparent case management systems had been installed, and every operation now required multiple levels of oversight and documentation. The building felt different, cleaner, more honest, more aligned with the ideals that had drawn her to police work 23 years ago. In the conference room, federal investigators were completing their final review of the case that had destroyed Roger's criminal empire. Agent Rebecca Foster, who had led the multi-state investigation, looked up as Catherine entered. "Chief Blake, we're just finishing our analysis of the financial networks that Mr. Kendall had established," Agent Foster said, gesturing to charts and documents that covered every available surface. The scope of the corruption was even larger than we initially realized. Catherine studied the evidence displays, seeing the full magnitude of what Roger had built during his years as her trusted second-in-command. "How many innocent officers were compromised without their knowledge?" 17 that we can confirm," Agent Foster replied. "Good officers who were assigned to cases or operations that unknowingly facilitated criminal activity. Their careers and reputations have been restored, and several have requested to return to your department." The knowledge that honest officers had been manipulated into serving Roger's criminal purposes added another layer of tragedy to the investigation. Catherine had spent weeks personally meeting with each affected officer, explaining how they'd been used and ensuring they understood that their integrity remained intact. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their discussion. Officer Santos appeared with a visitor that brought a smile to Catherine's face for the first time in hours. "Chief, Mr. Harper and his daughter are here to see you," Santos announced. James Harper entered the room carrying a manila folder, followed by 9-year-old Lily, who had grown several inches since their harrowing escape from the warehouse complex. The little girl now moved with the confidence of a child who had survived something terrible and emerged stronger, while James carried himself with the quiet pride of a father who had protected his daughter against impossible odds. "Catherine," James said warmly, embracing her with the familiarity of someone who had shared life and death experiences. "How are you holding up?" "Better each day," Catherine replied honestly. "The department is healing, the community is beginning to trust us again, and knowing that Roger's entire network has been dismantled makes the sacrifices feel worthwhile." Lily stepped forward with a carefully wrapped package. "Ms. Catherine, I made this for you in art class." Catherine knelt to receive the gift, unwrapping it to reveal a beautifully detailed drawing of a helicopter flying over a city skyline. In the aircraft's windows, 2 figures could be seen: a pilot and a police officer working together to protect innocent people below. "It's beautiful." "Lily," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'll hang it in my office so I can remember every day why we do this work." James opened his manila folder and spread several documents across the conference table. "The federal aviation contracts have been approved," he announced. "My company will be providing aerial surveillance and emergency response services for law enforcement agencies throughout the region." Agent Foster examined the contracts with interest. "Mr. Harper, your thermal imaging capabilities and tactical experience proved invaluable during this investigation. Having that expertise available for future operations will significantly enhance our law enforcement capabilities." Catherine studied the partnership agreements, noting how James's military background and flight expertise would provide her department with resources they'd never had access to before. More importantly, it would maintain the professional relationship that had developed between 2 people who had learned to trust each other under the most extreme circumstances. "There's something else," James said, producing a final document from his folder. "Lily and I have been talking, and we've decided to relocate permanently to this area. She wants to attend school here, and I want to be available to support the department's operations." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy says we can get a house with a big yard, and I can visit Ms. Catherine whenever I want." Catherine felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized that the traumatic events that had brought them together had also created something positive: an extended family of people who understood the importance of protecting innocent lives and standing up to corruption. "Agent Foster," Catherine said, "what's the status of the other departments that were affected by Roger's network?" "Complete restructuring in 2 states, partial reorganization in the 3rd, Agent Foster replied. "Your department's recovery model is being used as a template for the rebuilding process. The transparency measures and accountability protocols you've implemented are being adopted across multiple agencies." Catherine reflected on the irony that her department's darkest period had ultimately led to improvements that would benefit law enforcement throughout the region. Roger's betrayal had been devastating, but exposing his corruption had created opportunities for positive change that wouldn't have existed otherwise. "Chief Blake," Agent Foster continued, "there's one final matter we need to discuss. The Federal Task Force is recommending you for commendation at the national level. Your actions during this investigation, both the detective work that exposed the corruption and the tactical decisions that protected civilian lives, represent the highest standards of law enforcement." Catherine shook her head. "The real heroes are the honest officers who continued doing their jobs despite being surrounded by corruption they didn't know existed. They maintained their integrity when everything around them was compromised." James smiled at her response. Catherine, accepting recognition for good work isn't about ego, it's about demonstrating to other officers that integrity and courage are valued and rewarded as the federal investigators concluded their briefing and prepared to leave. Catherine found herself standing with James and Lily in the lobby, where the memorial wall honored officers who had died in service. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the building that had been completely transformed in the 6 months since Roger's criminal empire had been exposed. "Lily," Catherine said, kneeling beside the little girl, "do you remember what I told you during our helicopter ride about why police officers do this work?" "To protect people who can't protect themselves," Lily replied solemnly. "That's right. And sometimes protecting people means making difficult choices and taking dangerous risks. But it's always worth it when innocent people are kept safe." James placed his hand on Catherine's shoulder. "What you built here, this department, these relationships, this commitment to honest police work, Roger never understood what he was really trying to destroy." Catherine looked around the renovated headquarters, seeing officers who now worked with transparency and accountability, community members who were beginning to trust law enforcement again, and partnerships that would strengthen public safety for years to come. The pain of Roger's betrayal would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something constructive that honored the memory of every honest officer who had ever worn the badge. "Come on," Catherine said, leading James and Lily toward the building's exit. "I know a place that serves excellent ice cream, and I think we all deserve to celebrate how far we've come." As they walked into the evening sunlight, Catherine realized that her story wasn't ending, it was beginning again, built on foundations of trust, integrity, and the knowledge that good people working together could overcome even the most sophisticated corruption. The helicopter drawing tucked under her arm would remind her every day that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the strongest bonds, and that protecting innocent lives was always worth whatever sacrifices were required.